or the rebels, Gilbert Achcar?
Who are the rebels? Well, this is actually the $1 billion question, actually, because even in NATO circles, you find the same questions. The fact is, of course, we know about the Transitional National Council, and even that is a limited knowledge because not all the members of this council are known, and there will be new members announced in order to represent the remaining areas, including Tripoli. And here you find a mixture of liberals and former regime members and traditional people representing tribal or regional components of the country. What we can judge really is the program put forward by this council. In terms of a political program, what we have looks like a democratic blueprint for a democratic transition. They pledged to organize election and actually 2 rounds of election, one for a constituent assembly, which would draft a constitution, and then a second round of election based on the constitution to elect a final government. And they pledged, and I'm really skeptical about that, but they pledge even that all the members of the existing National Council, the Transition National Council, would not enter in this electoral arena for the 2 rounds of election. Well, of course, this again remains to be seen. At the level of the economic program that is represented in the existing cabinet of the council, you find people who actually were already playing the same role under Gaddafi in supervising the neoliberal reforms in the country. So nothing much original, I think, to expect in that regard. I mean, this is not a socialist revolution. I don't think anyone has ever had any kind of illusion about that. But this said, when we think of the rebels in terms of the fighting people, the fighting groups, when we think of the rebels in terms of the masses that have been, the insurgent masses that we have even seen in Tripoli on Sunday night coming out in huge numbers in what was formerly called the Green Square, which is the Martyrs Square, well, then you find, a completely heterogeneous landscape, and I would say the overwhelming majority of these people are people with no previous political background, and including those holding weapons now, because you have, most of on the rebel side, most of the people holding weapons were civilians before that. They were not military, and most of these people, after 42 years of dictatorship without any real genuine political life in the country, are very difficult to describe politically. We will have to wait and see what will come out when you will have a real political struggle starting in the country, in the same way that we are witnessing a political struggle going on in Egypt or Tunisia, the 2 countries where the dictators have been toppled until now.
How did NATO choose to work with this group of rebels rather than others?
Well, you don't have much choice. I mean, when many countries in the world recognize the Transitional National Council, and you hear people saying, well, it's not elected. Well, how could it be elected? It's an insurrectional situation, and you deal with what you have. They didn't claim to be the permanent rule of the country. They call themselves from the start interim or transitional, and they say that they will organize election and just leave the scene. And I just mentioned that they even say that all the members of their council would not even run in the next 2 rounds of election. So there's no alternative to the Gaddafi rule for the time being in Libya, but this council. Now, what will happen politically politically remains to be seen. Again, it's like saying in Egypt, well, in Egypt Mubarak was toppled, but who took power? The military. And actually, in that sense, what is happening now in Libya is a more radical transformation of the regime than what you had in Egypt. Because in Egypt, basically, aside from the tip of the iceberg that was pushed aside, Mubarak and his cronies, basically the army is still in control, and it has been the backbone of the regime from the start, from the 50s. Whereas now in Libya, although you have former members of the regime in the rebellion, the structures of the regime, starting with the army, of course, of Gaddafi, which was a group of private militias and Praetorian guards, and also including mercenaries, this is crumbling, this is collapsing, and we have seen how it has collapsed in Tripoli, even though it is not completely finished yet.